I see people with $2 million that are spending it all on their kids. And I'm like, well, I know, from people I know. And I'm like, well, you've got to retire someday. But they do, and again, they do the child a disservice.
Welcome to Wealthion. I'm Wealthion founder Adam Taggart. Thanks for joining us for part 2 of our interview with high net worth financial advisor Ted Oakley. If you haven't yet watched part 1 of this discussion with Ted, in which he explains why he doesn't think the bear market is over yet and is headed lower, likely much lower over the rest of the year, head over to our channel at youtube.com/Wealthion and watch it there first. It sets the context for the investment themes we discuss in this video. Ted also shares the strategies he recommends for families to follow to successfully protect their wealth through the rough ride he sees ahead, so be sure to stick around for that. Okay, let's get started watching part 2 of our interview with Ted Oakley. I want to pivot to what I hope will be the focus of the second half of this conversation, Ted. I've been really excited to be able to talk about this with you. Is you work with high net worth families, that's your focus, and you have a really good sort of front row seat to how these people have become these very successful wealth creators in their lives, and then how they have passed that pass those values on to their children, so that their children take that wealth and grow it for the family and the progeny for hopefully generations going forward, as opposed to just spending it all out. So if you could just kind of tell us, what have you seen as being some of the most important things to keep in mind for families who are working to build wealth, to be able to have that sustain for the generations ahead?
Let me say this. I've looked at major wealth for 4 decades or more. And interesting enough, a lot of that hasn't changed after they made a lot of money. One of the things that's happened that's different, though, the last 7 or 8 years is a lot of these families got paid so much for these companies that it was so much higher than it would have normally been. So there's a lot of money was created for families. And I have to say, I don't have all the answers, but I have a lot of experience in watching. And we always break those down into 2 categories. You have a category of the business owning family that sold the company and made a lot of money, let's say 25 to 250 million or higher. Then you have a whole group of people that I put in the second category, that the prior generation was the one that had the money. So you're in the second, third, and fourth generation, and they've got an entirely different set of problems. But the first one, where they make the money in this generation, and this is what I see with people and their children, and that is if you ask them what they want, they would say, I want my children to be, good stewards of money. I want to be responsible in the community. I want to be philanthropic. They want all these things for them. And then the way they go about it is just give them some of them do, just give them a lot of money. Well, it doesn't work that way. One of the things you have to do and realize, if you have a lot of money, and you've got to really press this because it's very hard for you to do as a first generation wealth. You probably, when you made a lot of money in that company, grew up without a lot, probably had some tough times. You had to pay the bills. Sometimes you had to get payroll, whatever. And you instinctively don't want that to happen to your children, which is the reverse of what you ought to be doing. You need to be able, why do you think eagles kick the babies to the curb? I mean, there's a reason for it, okay? And that is, you want them, in order for you to get what you want for that child, you're going to have to do some things that are contra to your feelings. And that is, you're going to have to say, okay, look, you're going to have to go out and get a job. Not only, you're not going to be traveling around backpacking Europe every summer. You're going to get a job, okay? And when you get out of college, you're going to get a job. I'm not going to help you, okay? I'll do the college, okay? But you got to get a job. And the money part of it is not yet. It's too early. And I don't agree with these people, by the way, that bring these 16 and 18-year-old kids in to the money manager and say, this is what it's all about. Because that's really not what it's all about. What it's all about is teaching that child some self-esteem that I can do it. I can do it on my own. I didn't need my mom and dad. Okay, I did it on my own. And then later on, when they're older, when you do put the wealth to them, they really appreciate it then because they understand now what happened. But I also see this whole set of people that they think, well, I'll just make it easy for them, and you're not making it easy for them. Those kids that you give all that money to will spend the rest of their life trying to show you and the whole community that they're smart too, that they can make money too. But you know what they do? They make tons of errors because they didn't go about it the right way, and they're just trying so hard to be purposeful. They're trying to really say, okay, I can do it. I'm going to show my parents I can do it too, when they make tons of errors. That's what I see out there, and I think people need to realize that you have to impart a different set of things for kids if you really want them to be what you want, okay? And it's hard to do, by the way. But I've done it myself, but it's not, I learned a lot from a lot of other people, by the way, and it wasn't something I dreamed up. But, and then you got a whole different set of problems for the second through the fourth generation. They're in a different mode, but they also have problems. And unfortunately, they chase a lot of rainbows because they haven't had the experience of actually, building a business and knowing what's happening. They got the money, don't get me wrong. But I call it the cocktail party information. They start exchanging information about my manager did this, and I've got one in Connecticut. I think I'll go to him. Well, I'm one in LA. I'll go out there. Well, you got to know more than that. And so that's the way these things happen. Hopefully that's not too long an answer for you, but that's the way I see it.
No, it's a great answer, and it jumps into exactly where I wanted to go here, which is, look, you work generally with your firm, your specialty is high net worth individuals, like you said, oftentimes clients that ran a business for many years, sold it, and are now wrestling with the decision of, okay, kind of my daily purpose in life, just went away. I just sold it to somebody, and I'm sitting on all this money. What do I do with my life going forward? But also, how do I pass that money along after I'm gone, that it continues to benefit my family for generations, as opposed to just getting spent by my kids, right? And you and I have talked a lot about this in the past, that it seems like without good guidance, the kids generally spend it, not necessarily because they're wasteful, but they just haven't developed the musculature that made the initial first generation wealth builder successful at what they were doing. So anyways, I think this is so fascinating to talk about, because I think the principles apply to any family, really, no matter what your net worth is, right? If you want your children to be financially savvy, to have a chance of making their own wealth, but also, to the extent you have wealth transition to them, to be good stewards of that and keep that going forward. I think the tenets are still largely the same. And what you talked about right there at the beginning of your answer, Ted, of the eagle kicking its young out of the nest so they learn how to fly. It is this struggle. I interviewed the Bill Danko, who was one of the co-authors of the book The Millionaire Next Door, right, which was basically a scientific study of self-made millionaires to find out what made them successful. And what that study found too is that most millionaire wealth, self-made wealth, is lost by the end of the second generation. And it's because the entrepreneurs protected their children from the adversity and the struggle that the initial entrepreneur had to go through. They just thought, oh, it was a tough life. I don't want my kids to have to claw like I did. But it's that clawing through adversity that actually is what makes you a successful steward of money, because you realize what it takes to earn it. You realize, okay, there's actually principles and tenets and a lot of hard work that goes into this. But like you said, they learn the rules of the road. They don't get diverted by the siren song of the guy at the country club who's got a hot tip, right? So it's a hard thing for a parent to set your kids up, to push them into adversity and to watch from the sidelines as they struggle through it. But if you kind of look at it from a, hey, if I'm doing this out of love because I want you to actually be able to stand on your own 2 feet and to be your own, wealth creator and wealth steward, it may be one of the most loving things you can do for them.
Well, it is the most loving thing you can do for them, because what happens is, this is really hard for somebody to do. I know if you're sitting there with 75, $100 million, hey, I can take care of these kids if I want to. Okay. However, you have to stop and think about it and say, okay, what is my window here to have them be what they need to be as a person? Forget about me. I'm thinking about them. And the window is this. And I've seen some really wealthy people do this very, very well. They knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't let the wealth show up or come through until later on. Yeah, they had had houses and different things like that. But when it came to the child, they said, hey, look, okay, you're going to work, and I'm going to make sure that you have a job when you're younger, before you get out of high school, when you're in college, summertime, we're going to work. Okay. And you're going to have to make some money, because you're going to help me out through school. And then when they get out, they need a job. And what you do is that period, what they learn that first 5 or 6 years, 7 years working for somebody else, is they learn what the world's all about. And then, you know what? At the end of that, their self-esteem is really high. And I've seen some great second generation people, because they were taught well by the first generation. And then the flip side of that is, I've seen just as many that were horrible, because they were just given a bundle of money. And so they have no self-esteem. They have no purpose in life. And they're continually, I see this all the time, continually trying to show that parent or those parents and everybody else in the world that, you know what, I'm just as smart as they were. I can do it if they can. And that's not the game here. I mean, the idea is for you to be out on your own, and then, show me what you can do. Ryan Holiday has a great book out here in Austin called The Obstacle is the Way. Nick Saban, I think, has used it with his football team. But the reasoning in the book is, look, if it was easy, you wouldn't do well. It wouldn't be good for you. And so I think that's true. The obstacle is the way. And it's the way that you have to learn things in life. And when you get to that end, it's so good. I see these second generation that have really got it together, because their parents did it correctly. They didn't show them anything till they got to be 40 years old or something. But by that time, this group had already done their own deal. And so that's how you do that, and that's how you create it. But it's really hard for people with a lot of money.
It is, and I would again say it's hard for people even of more modest means to still not want to step in and provide bridges for their children over life's trials and tribulations. And so I think that the role of the folks watching this video, and most of the folks watching this, are parents or have children that they influence, whether it's niece, nephews, neighbors, whatever. And it's really part of our role as people who are developing financial resilience to bring up the next generation, right? So, wealth, we talk about the power, the magic of compounding of wealth over time. Well, to take advantage of that, you got to keep the wealth in place, right? For it to be able to benefit from the compounding. So a lot of what we're sort of talking about here, Ted, you have in your book here, The Psychology of Staying Rich. And you've published a number of books like this, where it's not a terribly long book, but it just contains sort of the essential information that you have gleaned from your time, again, your decades of advising people, many of them of high means, but what you've seen works. And a couple of things that you talked here about kids that I just want to make sure folks hear is, I love how in this making your kids work for it and have to go through the struggle, one of the things that you say to tell them is, you want to give them all the support in the world emotionally, right? So you tell them, look, hey, I'm going to give you the hard truth here. You're on your own, Junior, right? You're going to have to do this yourself, but you're not alone, right? We're here for you to support you emotionally, but also to be your font of wisdom. You can come tap us. Hey, you got a business idea. You want to bounce that off of us. You can benefit from all of our, years of expertise here. We're rooting for you. We're here to cheer you on to win. How you actually execute the game plan is going to be up to you, though. So I think that's a really important element. There are a few others, but I saw you smiling as I was saying that. So do you have anything else to add on that particular point?
Well, I think what happens with people is that it doesn't mean you don't love your children at all, but if you really love them, you want them to be, long after you're gone, to be just, standalone kind of people, so they don't have to have your money to make that happen. And to me, people, they forget, they lose sight of it, they slip up, and but you have to be really diligent on this. I wrote a little book we still have called Rich Kids, Broke Kids, and the byline was the failure of estate planning. And the reason I wrote it is because they go in and people teach all of estate planning. We're going to do this. Believe me, I do really believe in trust too, to take care of wealth. So don't get me wrong on that one. But the thing about it is they forget the biggest ingredient, which is to teach no matter how you do the estate plan, if you don't teach your second generation something, they can blow it anyway. And so that's why we wrote that, with Rich Kids, Broke Kids, because it was so many, we've seen it so many times where they didn't teach that part of it. The estate plan didn't make any difference.
Yeah.
They didn't teach that part of it.
So, on this channel, I've railed a lot with our guests over the time of how poorly our education system teaches kids about financial literacy, right? And we end up generally sending people out in the world who really are wholly unprepared for the financial realities of the world. They don't know how to budget. They don't know how to save. They don't know much about investing. They don't know how to, take on a mortgage. It's just sort of expected they're going to figure that out along the way. And many people stumble and make bad decisions and whatnot. So I think there's a real dearth of real education there in school that we need. I think there's an equivalent in the home, which is what I'm sort of hearing from you here, which is that, hey, we as parents need to be teaching our kids about how to be good stewards of, and be good wealth creators, but also good stewards of the family wealth over time. Big part of it is going out in the world and figuring out, the rules of wealth creation on your own, like we talked about. But there are a few other things here you said that I think are also important. So they need to learn to make their own decisions, right? They got to exercise those muscles of doing analysis, coming up with a thesis, making the decision. They then have to learn how to be accountable for the results of their decisions, right? If they make a bad decision, you can't swoop in and make everything magically better for them. And then they need to learn how to overcome adversity. Okay, so I had a failure. What can I do next to try to turn that failure into more of a success, right? And again, you get that by practice in life. And the more you do, the better you get at it. And like you said, over time, they develop that self-confidence that, hey, I can take whatever life throws at me, right? That's all very key to becoming a good wealth creator. You also say, teach them about family wealth. But I think I heard you say this earlier. Don't just bring them in when they're early and say, oh, we have all this money, just be a fly in the wall with our financial advisor. You really want to teach them what went into building that wealth, right? Like, here are all the sacrifices we needed to make. Here are some of the big mistakes I made that were super hard to recover from, but thank goodness we did, right? They got to understand that wealth just didn't magically appear in your pockets over time, that you had to, a lot of hard sweat, blood, and tears went into it. Answer any questions they have. So, be a good educator for them. But this part I also thought was really important, is you said, your goal as the parent is for one day to pass the torch on to them to take over managing the family wealth. But they need to earn their seat at that table. They need to go out into the world, provide that they can create and sustain and nurture capital well, and then eventually come back and kind of, argue that, okay, I now deserve a seat at the table here, and you make them earn their way back in. You just don't put them on the board and let them start making decisions if they don't have a good basis for experience. So I saw you nodding a lot as I was saying.
Well, what happens is you have to think about what you want to do. I mean, I have a son and a daughter. Okay. When they were both 12 and 13, I went to business owners and gave them cash for the whole summer. Now these children never knew this. Okay. And so they would get paid every Friday. Okay. But the business owner didn't have to, they were friends of mine. They didn't have to do anything. But what they did learn was this: if the first job, for example, my son was washing cars at a GM dealership, he was with people washing those cars that had no education whatsoever. So they got a good look at the world from the truly ground up. Okay. My daughter paid a person that had a women's shoe company. She had to work there all summers, in the summers. I paid him cash. He paid her. She comes home, says, "Hey, you know what? I saw these two ladies that I thought were really nice, but they were mean." And I'm like, see, what's happening here? We're getting a piece of the world here, which you don't get if you're not out there. And so you press them, you push them into that. And then they know after those years, okay, you got to get your own job, and then you get your own job. It keeps on going. You probably think I'm pressing that part too much, but believe me, that is really the most important part to me of making sure your offspring understand where this is going. They have to be able to stand on their own 2 feet.
All right. So make sure that your kids go out there and develop, all those skills on their own, right? And I should just underscore for folks here too that, Ted, you are a completely self-made man. You came from a background that was, I'll let you describe it, but you could say poor, correct?
Yeah, I was probably more than poor. I mean, I was at the really, really, really low end of the socioeconomic scale. I mean, and there's a lot of people like that. I'm not. There's so many really successful people that I see that grew up with nothing. But I had very little. No running water, no inside toilets. I mean, we lived in some shacks. But you know what? You get educated, just like when people have money. If you get out there and have to hit it, you learn pretty quickly. And there's so many great people I know that build companies that had a very similar background, and I'm always love to watch them, how well they've done, and my hat's off to them.
Well, I wanted to underscore that for two reasons. One, so that folks don't think, oh, there's this ivory tower, silver spoon guy who's telling me, I got to go out and struggle. No. You've done it. You've gone from the low end, to the successful end. And the other part is that, it can be done. Right. So for people who are looking at here and saying, look, maybe we don't have a lot of means, but I want my kids to be more successful than I, well, Ted, you came from, poor means and really knocked the ball out of the park. So you know that there's a pathway that folks can follow, and that's what you're trying to lay out for folks here.
Well, I have founded two of the primary foster child foundations in Texas. And between the two, they're 501c3s, but I really funded them big to keep the thing going over the many years, 22, 23 years. And we help about 10,000 kids a year. But if you want to really see a tough go, okay, you see a foster child that has to come out of foster care at 18 years old, and when that happens and they do really well, now that is a success story, much bigger than anything I've ever done or anybody else has done. But I have so much respect for those kids that come out of there and then they push it forward. And there's so many tough stories out there, but there's a lot of people succeeding with them. I'm always optimistic that if you can say, hey, there's a lot of people can do it.
Well, that's just absolutely inspirational, and I know you mentioned that for the reasons you just gave, but I do want to give you the kudos for what you're doing there to support those kids. And I think it's a really good example of the importance of why we're having this conversation, which is rather than having wealth that just gets, you know, spent away over a generation, how can you create it into something that leaves a legacy behind that supports great causes like that? And I want to end with one other element that you talk about. So we sort of talked about the hard stuff, right? You know, give your kids the tough love, make them struggle, et cetera. But then in terms of things that you have seen in families that have done a good job in passing the wealth on for generations, these were some of the key success factors you found in common with them. You write here that the key is keeping the family united, both in terms of its family bonds, like everybody actually liking and enjoying each other, but also with sort of a shared mission. And there's this term familyness that you refer to. Can you just talk about that briefly?
Well, what I've seen a lot of times is after people have a significant liquidity event, the family has a lot of money, uh, and all of a sudden, I think this is an era, by the way, but they start to treat one child different from the others, and that's never good in the long. That creates an unfamiliness, a matter of fact. And so, what you want is something where everybody's on equal footing. I understand kids are different. I understand that. Okay, that one is maybe easier than the other, but you know what? They didn't ask to be here. And so when you do that, I think the one thing you have to do to keep the family together is to be able to for them to be able to look at you and your spouse and what do you do? You know, are you running around, you know, dilly-dallying, throwing money away, doing that sort of thing? So you got to remember, they're looking at you. And so if you say, you know what, I don't think I'm going to buy that because I can get it cheaper, I can do that better. You know, all those little things like that go into that family thing, and they start to see the two parents. And you can't say as a parent, you know, I want you to be like me when you're just throwing money away and doing all the crazy
So you have
things.
to serve as the example of the type of
Yeah.
person you want your child to become,
And
obviously.
that's what creates the family situation. And I think as a person, the worst thing you can do as somebody with a lot of money to their children is to hold it over them, because they never pull out if you hold it over them. Yeah, you've got the money, and you can say, I'm not going to, you know, you do things to them that they have a love-hate relationship with you. And that's not good. I've seen it many, many times. And they stay around because of the money, but deep down inside, they'd like to say, you know what, just give me some money and leave me be. Let me go do my thing.
Right.
And that gets away from the family thing. The family thing ought to be, hey, we're all pulling together, we're pulling for you too. And we're going to teach you something. And you do that. And it's interesting because I always tell people, look, I said, there's so many things you can teach a young person about investing. I mean, if nothing else, have them go down and buy a rent house, go down to the bank, borrow the money, have to do the lease, you know, have to take care of the insurance, figure out does it cash flow. It's not on a big scale, but you learn a lot. It's just like it'll work in a big corporate building too. So that's how you teach. You teach what's going on.
Right. Well, they're certainly going to learn a lot more about the practicalities of economics and finance doing that than going to through most high schools and colleges, sadly.
For sure.
There were two other things that you mentioned that I thought seemed to be great kind of best practices for families. One was the sense of shared mission and sense of shared values. So, your job as the parent is to, determine what the family values are, but make sure that your kids are really aware of them. And of course, as you were saying, you have to live in accordance with them, right? You can't live set an example that's contrary to what you're trying to instill in your kids. But it's a sense that they really understand the why behind what the family is setting out to achieve. Right? We're not just making money so that we can all spend it. We're doing this because we have a shared vision of what this family, the impact we want it to have in the world.
Well, and I'll give you an example of that. And I've seen this with a few people that, and it was really interesting to me the way they did it. They had plenty of money to have a private jet, but they didn't let their kids fly on it. Now, people might say, well, how are they going to get to where you're going to your place in Idaho? And you know how they're going to get there? They're going to get on Delta or United, and that's how they're going to get there. And they're going to figure out that's what you do and how you buy the ticket and that sort of thing. I got to go through TSA. You're not going to grow up from 15 years old getting on Bombardier every day and thinking that's the way life is, because that's not the way life is, okay? So I've watched people do things like that, and they separate what they're doing with their spouse from what the kids see. They do see you have a home somewhere, this, that, and the other, but they don't have to see everything else. And I think that's what separates those people, and that's how they have the ability to really teach a lot of things, because they don't share all that wealth, all those trappings with them. The only thing they get to see is, okay, I'm getting married. Here's your budget, by the way. It's not unlimited. Here it is. And they could afford it. I'm just saying they could afford it, but they do it the right way, which is, you got to learn something.
Exactly. And I just want to reiterate that, look, you don't have to have $75 million to be setting this type of example. You can be doing it, much more.
You're totally correct. I see people with $2 million that are spending it all on their kids. And I'm like, well, I know, from people I know, I'm like, well, you've got to retire someday. But they do. And again, they do the child a disservice, but it's not a dollar thing. You're right. But it has to do with your attitude to what you're going to do toward children and how you're going to make it work. And I have to tell you, there's a lot of great examples out there. And I see it with my interns. We usually have 5 or 6 interns a year. And about 2/3 of them they really got it down. I can tell they've got it together. And 1/3 of them don't have a clue.
All right. Well, look, the one last sort of success tactic here was, and I've seen this with families who I think have been successful at this, is they prioritize having family events that really are just designed around bonding with each other, building affection, and creating a shared sense of legacy. So they might be, meeting at a place that's meaningful to the family, or going back to where the parents used to go vacation when they didn't have a lot of money, before the family became really wealthy, but it has a lot of sentimental value for them. And it sort of shows, hey, even though we're very successful, we came from meager means. But it's getting the family together, and not we're going to blow a bunch of money and pamper each other. It's we're going to invest in the things that really matter, which are just creating family memories and strengthening these bonds that tighten us, so that as the torch gets passed on, hopefully the values that made the original generation successful are really ingrained in the successors.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I've written about this before, but there's certain sets of people that are really good about talking about the family and what this generation did, the generation before. I'll give you a good example of farmers. Why does a young farmer at 32 years old today, why are they pretty good at farming and just as good as their dad was, their granddad was, or maybe their great-granddad? It's because they were taught and told that whole thing, and they lived it, as they went along. And I think people need to do that. I mean, I think too many times once they really make it or whatever, they don't have a chance to sit down and really spend a lot of time with the kids and say, this is how you get to this point. This is why our family is so fortunate today to be where we are. Okay. And that's only taught through conversation. You got to talk about it, talk about things. And there's certain groups of people that really tell their stories. Jewish families do it really well. I mean, they tell the stories of how we got to where we were. And I think that's interesting, but that's what you have to do in these family situations. And you're right about this. Just, having some really simple things you do as a family, as a group, ends up being some really great memories.
Yeah, well, it's funny. We'll conclude on this. If you go to YouTube and you just type in centenarian advice, you'll find a bunch of clips of people who interview people that have lived to 100 years or older, and they ask them, "Hey, tell the rest of us what really matters in life." And none of them talk about the money that they amassed. None of them talk about things. They generally talk about relationships, or they talked about the things in their life that had purpose, where they achieved a big goal that they placed a lot of meaning to. And so, to your point there, Ted, it's not the material stuff. It really is, generally, oftentimes, just the more simpler things, but the things that truly matter. Well, look, Ted, thank you so much for imparting so much of this wisdom to us. I really was looking forward to have you on to dive deeply into this, because it's not an area we get into very often. But I think at the end of the day, it's what people really care about, right? Where it's sort of like, look, in life, we all want to be rich, successful, and famous or whatnot. But at the end of the day, we just want ourselves, and certainly our kids, to be happy, to be good people, and to be happy. At the end of the day, when it comes to wealth, yes, we want our wealth to be, we'd like to generate a lot of wealth and enjoy it, but really what we want to create is just a foundation that's going to serve us and our progeny well going forward in a sustainable, healthy way. And I think you've given us a lot of great best practices, especially from your relatively advantaged position of working with the people who have been sort of the highest achievers and most successful on this thing. So I appreciate you sharing these sort of, insider best practices with us.
You bet. Thanks.